the Green Party of Canada. And the letter referred to, and I just summarize a bit, summarized the murder of 25 Sikhs, including a 4-year-old child, during a terror attack on a Kabul Gurdwara, the assassination of 19 leaders of the Afghan Sikh community, and the kidnapping of a 13-year-old girl whose father had previously been murdered by terrorists. I also would like to quote from that letter. I quote, "In light of the immediate threat faced by these communities, we urge you to create," speaking to the Minister of Immigration, "create a special program for Afghan, Sikh, and Hindu refugees so that they can be brought to safety in Canada." And I can assure you, Mr. Chair, the government was already at work. We announced special immigration measures to offer a pathway to citizenship for Afghans at risk due to their association with Canada. We deployed troops to Afghanistan and then began evacuation from Kabul. Later, we expanded efforts to bring members of vulnerable communities to Canada through a humanitarian evacuation. This included women leaders, human rights defenders, journalists, LGBTQIA+ individuals, and persecuted religious minorities, which included Sikhs and Hindus. This government policy was discussed over the months leading up to the fall of Kabul. It was broadly supported, and it included Sikhs and Hindus. One organization of Canadians working in partnership with our government was the Manmeet Singh Bhullar Foundation. This Canadian NGO was founded in honor of Manmeet Singh Bhullar, a former Alberta government Conservative minister and MLA, who was tragically struck and killed by a truck on a highway as he was helping a stranded motorist. And in 2020, the foundation became an official partner of our government. The foundation worked to identify vulnerable Sikhs and Hindus in Afghanistan to provide their names to IRCC to facilitate their immigration to Canada. As the situation in Afghanistan worsened, officials at IRCC and the NGO shifted their work from facilitating the immigration of these persecuted minorities to facilitating their evacuation from Kabul. Towards the end of August, the NGO contacted me about a group of more than 200 Afghan Sikhs and Hindus who had been approved by IRCC for evacuation to Canada. The group was struggling to link up with Canadian soldiers and officials on the ground in Kabul. The NGO provided me with information about the location and the status of the group, and when I received this information from the NGO, I passed it on to the chain of command, and I had a responsibility to do so. The government and military officials on the ground contacted the group, who were already outside the gates of the airport, which is important to note. The group was instructed to make their way to a specific location near the airport to link up with the Canadian soldiers. Unfortunately, the link-up never happened. To conclude, I just want to emphasize, I did not order a rescue mission. I passed along information from a Canadian NGO partner about a group of vulnerable people who were cleared for humanitarian evacuation to Canada. I followed and executed government policy. And for the record, I would like to submit as evidence my initial statement to the Globe, the letter from the opposition MPs, and the news release from when we expanded the resettlement program to bring more Afghans to safety for this committee to refer to. And I have it right here. And now I'll be happy to take your questions as well.
Thank you. I can't distribute them to the members, but once they get translated, we can distribute them to the members. With that, I'm going to go to our 6-minute round. Mr. Bazan, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Minister, welcome back to committee. Minister, what date exactly did the Canadian Armed Forces operation take place to escort Afghans to the airport in Kabul?
So,
the specific dates
of
the operation. When everything was all falling apart.
So the actual evacuation, when the Canadian Armed Forces, we had a request for assistance from Global Affairs on July 27th, and on the July 30th, the CAF, we had approval to deploy to Afghanistan.
Okay, and so when was the last day of operations in Afghanistan?
The last days of operation for the evacuation you're asking about, or last days of
the evacuation?
The 27th of August.
Which one?
27th of August.
Okay. Now you...
I would say the last Canadian Armed Forces left at that time. I don't remember the exact date when the actual flight of the last people left, but the official date was 27th.
Okay. Now you're quoted in that Globe story that you're talking about, that you provided direction to the Canadian Armed Forces through the appropriate chain of command, and you've said that again in your testimony today. So who at the Canadian Armed Forces did you gave direction to?
So you're talking about the Globe article or my statement?
Your statement. Who did you?
My current statement.
Yep.
Yes, to the chain of command, to the Chief of Defence Staff.
And only to the Chief of Defence Staff, or you talk to others as well?
No, when it comes to, as you know, when it's Chief of Defence Staff is the person that I, as you know, as the Minister of Defence works through, but there's always the staff that's always there.
Okay, so he was the very first person in the Canadian Armed Forces that you talked to?
To be honest, there's people in the room, and when it comes to the information, it's within a large group. As you know, you as Parliamentary Secretary, you know the number of people that are there.
Did you inform the Prime Minister's office before you gave this direction to the Canadian Armed Forces?
No, I was working directly and with the evacuation.
Okay, and do you see that there is any difference between giving a ministerial direction versus giving a command?
What are you referring to here?
No, did you see this as, or do you think the Canadian Armed Forces interpreted that you said this is what's going to happen and that was more of a command? Or was it just you saying, no, I think we should do this?
So first,
in your conversations with the chain of command.
Let's talk about what in particular is that are you talking about here? When it comes to direction and command of what?
Command of the evacuation of Canadians and the priority and Afghans and other minority groups within Afghanistan.
Oh, the overall evacuation?
Yeah.
Yes, that was the direction that was given.
Okay, and that would have been interpreted as a command from the Minister of National Defence.
Of the direction, and is obviously given the authority for the Canadian Armed Forces to work. Yes.
Okay, and did your former Chief of Staff George Young participate in these meetings and also help in making sure that that directive was carried out?
I had a staff, yes, the chief of staff, and my staff is always there to work.
And
yes.
George Young would have been your Chief of Staff at that time?
Yes, he was.
And you're aware that today the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration actually issued a letter to the Minister of Immigration and Citizenship asking them to further investigate the role that Mr. Young played in the fraudulent use of documents and templates from Global Affairs Canada in the evacuation of Kabul?
Well, first of all, I just heard that report came out. I haven't read it, but I'm here to answer questions regarding the motion that all of you approved here.
So, so what exact date then was your Chief of Defence Staff, which was General Eyre at the time, was the acting Chief of Defence Staff? Was he made aware of this decision, the exact firm date?
Which decision are you talking about?
The decision
actual
to move
order
ahead
to start
with
the evacuation
of Kabul and carry
So as
out
I
your
stated
orders.
here, we had authority. We had received a request for assistance on July 27th. And July 30th was the direction and authority given for CAF to deploy to Afghanistan to support.
And that's when that direction was given as to the priority list of who were taking out Canadians and other Afghans.
The authority to support the evacuation mission.
Okay, and when was CANSOF, Special Operation Forces, were they in their room on that very day, or did that when you gave that direction?
Well, Mr. Bazan, as you know how that works, having you worked at in defense, it's not that the CANSOF is actually there. You work through the Chief of Defence Staff and the chain of command.
So did you have a personal conversation at all with the commanders at CANSOF at that time?
I did not have a direct conversation with the commander of CANSOF, no.
At any time between the time the order came down, July 30th, until August 27th?
No, I did not speak to the commander of CANSOF, no.
Okay. Can you give us the exact specifics, or do you have a copy? Was there a written directive, or was it just a verbal directive that you gave?
No, once we received the request for assistance, you provide, I don't have the exact letter of the direction of authority that I gave to the Canadian Armed Forces at that time.
Okay, so do you know then at what point in time that Special Operation Forces and JTF2 were given the command that they were to leave the Kabul airport and go outside the wire and take on that extra risk?
Well, again, what are you referring to? The evacuation itself?
The evacuation, during the evacuation.
The overall evacuation.
Yeah,
right?
and specifically in those final hours when things were going sideways and there was people, we know that there was Canadians and Afghan interpreters and others that were trying to get through the wire to get into the airport and were being denied, and Special Operation Forces and JTF2 had to leave the airport. So are you aware?
Had to leave the airport. Well, I think it's important for you to clarify.
Well, to the rendezvous point, right?
Because I think you're making trying to say something without specifics here. If you can ask me very directly what you're saying, then I can answer the question more clearly here. Because when you talk about a rendezvous point, it seems to me that you're referring to the Globe article here.
Well,
And
somebody else is going to have to ask that question because Mr. Bazan is out of time. Madame Lambropoulos, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here with us today to answer some questions. You spoke about a letter that had been signed by several members of different parties. And so just to clarify, this was a letter from a parliamentary friendship group, or was it just a letter from MPs?
this was actually a letter that we got a copy here from members of Parliament from 3 different parties that had signed it, 25 members of Parliament.
And it was asking for the Immigration Department to create a specific pathway program to assist humanitarily Sikhs in Afghanistan, as well as other minority communities.
And this letter here, particularly, if I could have to read it out, and I could tell you exactly who they were referring to. It was referring to Sikhs and Hindus.
Okay. So thank you very much. And I'm wondering, what the process was at that point. I know that the Government of Canada had other minorities to include in that list. Can you include the full list of minorities that were to be evacuated if accepted by Canada? And once you read that list, if you can tell us what the process was for those people to get out.
Absolutely. First of all, it was the Minister of Immigration who actually announced the program. It was on July 23rd. The Special Immigration Measures Pathway was announced, and that was on July 23rd. And August 13th, it was expanded at that time by the Minister of Immigration to include vulnerable groups such as women leaders, human rights defenders, journalists, persecuted religious minorities, LGBTQI individuals, and family members of previously settled interpreters.
Okay, thank you. And so if somebody had been given the permission to come, what would the process be at that point?
So, this is where obviously the Immigration Department would be handling that process. All the names had to be approved. I do remember even when it came to all the interpreters, all the names that we had to vet who actually worked with us, everything was sent to the Immigration Department for them to add on to the official list.
And how were they helped out if they were on that official list?
If in terms of first before we actually had to do the full evacuation, they had the official list where they were working. Global Affairs Canada was working with immigration with chartered flights, and also they requested our support. I didn't get into the details of that. That's obviously would have to be discussed by them, the exact process. But I do know is that they actually had the approved list, and anybody who was on that list was cleared to come to Canada, which actually included the Afghan Sikhs and Hindus.
Okay, thank you very much. And if you could describe what role you played during the evacuation a little bit more so that we understand what role you played versus the people who were on the ground, what role they played.
So as a minister, I was given authority through the government policy to support the evacuation, which was received from Global Affairs on July 27th. And then once I gave direction to the Canadian Armed Forces to support that airlift, at that time it wasn't that involved. However, once we had to evacuate all our Canadian Embassy personnel and pull out completely because the Taliban had taken all of Kabul, the work intensified when on the August 19th, when we had to reinsert with the UK and the US, we came up with a plan to safely start continuing the evacuation.
Okay. And all of the efforts that were on the ground, can you remind us who was in charge of actually getting those done, the orders? Who was the one giving the orders on the ground?
So in a volatile situation like this, normally, even in normal circumstances, once direction is given to the Chief of Defence Staff, orders are given to the Chain of Command, and they decide who is going to execute those orders. And in this case here, the same process was followed, but we all had to be directly and closely involved right from the beginning because one, we had to work with our allies. I was on calls with my counterparts, getting the mission sorted out and which nations are going to be involved. In this, the first nations were us, the UK, and the US. Then, at the same time, the military is working out with their allied partners how to secure everything safely. We moved additional support into Kuwait at that time in anticipation. Once we decided that we could do it safely, direction was given to go back and secure the airport with our allies. And then once we actually were on the ground, that time you leave the actual operations to obviously the Canadian Armed Forces personnel. We had to monitor the other situation very closely from, for example, intelligence, the threats that were coming in, while at the same time we were actually had to also plan the evacuation because the airport could be shut down almost at any time. So we had to immediately start planning what that was going to look like.
Well, I have 20 seconds left. No more questions. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Madame Lavropoulos. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre, pour votre présence.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for being here. My first question, I'd like to ask how you received information with respect to the localization. Can you hear me, Minister? You can. So I wanted to know how you received the information as to the location of the 225 Sikh community members. Was it via phone, text message? How did they communicate with you?
You actually called me directly.
Parfait. Est-ce que vous avez reçu des communications?
And did you receive communications from other groups? I'm thinking of groups that were in the green zone, interpreters, for instance, that were identified as being at risk. Did you get information regarding other groups?
Don't understand the green zone question, but in terms of different groups, absolutely. There was actually basically anybody who had my number was calling me at that time. And again, just like with any information that was provided to me, I had the responsibility to forwarding that information. And also to note, my staff was also heavily engaged. So my military email at that time was extensively, which was part of it was public. I believe I was receiving thousands of emails at that time, and Global Affairs actually received up to close to 1 million emails at that time as well. So there's a whole team of triaging information, feeding it into the entire system for the Canadian Armed Forces can have as much as accurate information as possible.
Donc, je comprends que vous avez reçu, entre autres, de l'information de l'ONU.
So I understand that you got information from the NGO that told you about the presence of interpreters about 5 kilometers from the airport that were priority individuals.
That I received was always forwarded.
De quelle façon ça a été...
In what way was this information sent to JTF2, where the rendezvous point would be? Was it a text message sent to General Air or a phone call?
How we conducted the operation. So with a sensitive operation like this, I was in a secure communication during our briefing. So that's when we would have daily briefings and we would be able to pass information.
Donc, l'information quant au point de rencontre...
So with respect to the rendezvous point, that was during an official meeting with General Air for the evacuation.
Referring to, though?
L'organisation qui vous informe.
The ONG, or the NGO rather, that told you about some names and people that were at risk as Sikh community members that should be met by JTF2. How did you inform JTF2 of the location of those people?
Me reforming, I want to make that very clear. The information that was received was about 200 people who were already at the airport. The communication that takes place is actually how they communicated amongst each other. That was done on the ground.
Okay. Donc, par rapport...
So, with respect to the evacuation, did other people have rendezvous points as far as you know?
So when it comes to, this wasn't the rendezvous point that everybody keeps referring to. The Canadian Armed Forces did have a plan on how to meet people. So regardless of which group, how they communicated, they were communicating with people on where to meet them, right? And that was communicated through them to the various groups and how that was being conducted. That does not go from me directly to the Canadian Armed Forces personnel on the ground.
Est-ce que vous avez fait un suivi de...
Did you follow up afterward to understand how information was transferred? It seems that the 225 people were the only ones to get to the link-up point.
First of all, the question at hand is, originally I thought was about, did I inappropriately use assets to bring people? But in this case here, I want to make it very clear, Steve, that because I believe it was your motion, that this was, first of all, these people were actually part of the government policy in place, right? So that's, I think, just want to make sure that we are clear there.
OK, on peut aller sur la question de la politique.
Okay, moving on to the question on the policy. The first time it was published was August 13th, so after evacuation had started, and this was a re-establishment policy. Are you saying that this is the same thing as the policy that IRCC would have? They would determine how to prioritize members?
About that it was their policy that it was announced, and it was my job was the evacuation, and in my job to execute that government policy.
Je répète ma question. La politique...
But the policy, the resettlement policy, is it the same as the evacuation policy?
I think a lot of the questions that you have here is more for the immigration. I would be happy to discuss the motion that you have here at hand. So a lot of the question that you have regarding is about from the immigration side. You'll have to talk to them for the details on that.
Sauf erreur, vous avez quand même utilisé la politique...
But unless I'm wrong, you use the resettlement policy as a reason to explain how some groups should be prioritized. I understand that to you, a resettlement policy would be the same as an evacuation policy.
Assertion here, there was a government policy that included Afghan 6, and we executed that government policy. No group. I've transferred information that was given to me to the Canadian Armed Forces, like I did for so many other folks who were contacting me at that time. The Canadian Armed Forces were triaging. And I also want to explain, when in an intense situation like this, when we're dealing with daily threats and making sure that we have the safety of our folks, we don't have time to be looking at micromanaging folks on the ground. We're discussing things. We feed that information. And I just wanted to make sure that if I had information given to me, that it could potentially save somebody's life, regardless of which group it was, I wanted to make sure it got to the right people so that they can triage that information and do what they needed to do with that.
Thank you, Madam Normandy. Ms. Matheson, 6 minutes, please.
Today, and I know that this motion has come forward because of the media over the summer, so I really appreciate you coming forward today to set the record straight. One thing is really clear in terms of a lot that happened. Many people feel that Canada didn't do enough during that evacuation of Afghanistan. Now, the special committee in Parliament studied it. We know that a lot of difficult decisions were made by folks. Canadians knew the threat of Afghanistan taking over or the Taliban taking over. They knew that was the possibility. We knew that interpreters, others who supported Canada's mission, were at risk. We knew that the marginalized communities that you referenced and that were referenced by the policies set forward, including Sikhs, were at risk when the Taliban took over. I wanted to ask Minister, and I'm sure you're aware of the crucial work of the civilian language and cultural advisors to our mission in Afghanistan. These were civilian Canadians with Afghani heritage. They stepped up to serve when they weren't, but they weren't warned that they would be put into uniform. They weren't warned that they would go out on patrols outside the wire, face long deployments that were beyond that standard cycle for troops. They had drastically different work conditions than they expected, and then they came back with no supports. Their fixed-term contracts were ended. They were left on their own. They they experienced so much, and it feels like they were left without any supports from the federal government. So can you tell the committee when you were first made aware of the difficulties, the situation, the plight of those language and cultural advisors?
Before you answer that question, Minister, it does seem a bit beyond the remit that we've been asked, you've been asked this committee for. You're welcome to answer the committee, answer the member's question, but it does strike me as a little bit beyond, and I failed to stop the clock. I should have stopped the clock earlier, so give you another 25 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, the only thing I will say is, I mean, I value the language cultural advisors who worked, and I served with many of them. But this is obviously a question for the current Minister of Defense. I just want to make sure that I answer the question appropriately for the motion at hand here, because it's very important, because there, you know, from inaccurate information can swirl out in different ways. I want to make sure that Canadians fully are aware that the decisions that I made was a result of our government policy. That just because I have the same religion, that wasn't a reason why I made certain decisions here. So I just want to make it. I just want to really stay focused on that. But you obviously raised an important issue that I'm sure you have the opportunity to talk to the current Minister of Defense about that.
Well, the ombudsman at the time, Gregory Lick, he was the ombudsman, and he raised this. Sorry, I'm caught on my pin. He raised this while you were the Minister of Defense. So you chose not to act. Can you just explain some of that reasoning there?
I mean, I think it's important that the current Minister of Defense answer those questions now.
Okay. One of the things that we know, and a letter that was received by all the members of the committee today, it was a letter from the Manmeet Singh Bular Foundation, Khalsa Aid, the World Sikh Organization. They raised their concerns about this motion, stating that at a time of increased anti-immigrant sentiment and the targeting of Sikh Canadians, we are concerned that the influences of politicization and partisanship will have a long-lasting impact on Canada's past and future efforts to answer the call for humanitarian assistance when the world is in need. For those of us who engaged with the minister at the time, we know that it is a blatant misrepresentation of the facts to suggest that his motivation to assist the Sikh and Hindu population to leave Afghanistan during the summer of 2021 was due to his sharing the same faith as these vulnerable people. Can you comment on this letter sent by these three quite significant organizations and your concerns in terms of when they talk about the time of increased anti-immigrant sentiment?
Caution the minister, this is a bit beyond the scope of the motion, but
this is what he
again,
referred to himself.
He's
so
he's welcome to answer the question as he sees fit.
I think just to kind of answer the question, there's many organizations and folks who actually do follow things very closely. And there is a significant concern right now, given what we're dealing with foreign interference from many different countries, and especially currently from India. And when it creates an anti-sentiment of any future governments would not want potentially to be able to support vulnerable people around the world, and that's why I kind of conclude from that. But like I said, I would like to stay at hand on the motion itself.
During the evacuation, there were many NGOs, as you spoke about, reaching out to the government to protect a lot of those marginalized communities. They spoke about the challenges facing, obviously, feminist activists, to LGBTQIA plus community members. Sikhs are included in that. Hindus were included in that. Why was it that the NGOs were raising this before the government acted at the time?
I mean, you would have to talk to the Minister of Immigration about that and or Global Affairs. One thing I can tell you, I mean, as a member of Parliament, I had my own advocacy work that was taking place. But one thing I can assure you, once I had the authority, we put every effort possible to evacuate as many people as possible. And I want to say this, safely as well. And that was a very key concern to making sure that we did it in a safe manner. And I wish, we could have got all vulnerable populations out that we needed to get out that was actually on our list. But we can also say that many people who are actually here today and I and hopefully some of you have met some of those folks and their families who have made it here safely because of those efforts. And again, just want to thank the Canadian Armed Forces for putting themselves in extreme risk for pulling off a very important mission.
Madame Gallant, 5 minutes.
Minister, did you get all the Canadians out of Afghanistan, and are they all out? Did you get them all out?
I can't answer that question for you. I've talked to Global Affairs Canada. They hold the information regarding for those.
Would you consider the evacuation to be a success, despite leaving 1,300 Canadians and interpreters that are forced to fend for themselves against the Taliban?
And I wish we could have gotten more. However, given the circumstances and the security threats that we were dealing with, I'm extremely proud of what the Canadian Armed Forces pulled off with our closest allies.
Can you give us an exact estimate of how many of those are left behind today?
I can't. Again, we don't track, and I'm not the minister in charge. Global Affairs normally holds that database and that information.
What actions have you undertaken to take responsibility for the 1,300 Canadians and interpreters that you've left stranded back in the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan?
And I answered a few of your questions, but what I would say is I thought the questions were regarding the motion at hand regarding the Afghan 6, whether I actually inappropriately used Canadian Armed Forces members to get vulnerable people out. I just want to make it clear so that you fully are aware that those folks were actually part of the government policy and that I was executing government policy at that time.
Yes, and I'm talking about the mission as a whole. Why was it that the Prime Minister called the election on the same day that the Taliban overtook Kabul?
Madame Gallant, we are wandering way far from the motion here, so maybe you should direct that question to Mr. Trudeau.
Okay, so what kit and equipment were provided to the soldiers to undertake the direction provided to the CAF by the minister during Op Aegis?
Sorry, could you repeat?
So,
Operation which one?
What kind of vehicles what were provided for Op Aegis?
The evacuation mission?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, when it comes to, the list of the equipment, this is where we don't get into details of that. Once the direction is given, you leave it for the Canadian Armed Forces to decide what is actually necessary. Whatever is needed, they figure that out, and they did. Our job is to make sure that they had the authority for them to do their work.
Okay, so you didn't ensure that the CAF had everything they needed to carry out the mission, to carry out the evacuation of Canadians.
That is the responsibility of the chain of command and the Chief of Defence Staff all the way through. But one thing I can assure you, many times we ask that question, is there anything else that is needed? And I can assure you that we were monitoring things very closely, and the Canadian Armed Force, from what I saw, was moving resources in anticipation, and they did absolutely amazing work in extreme circumstances.
Are you aware of whether or not they had any armored vehicles, any artillery? After all, they had to go and evacuate our Canadian citizens and interpreters.
So the safety part was extremely important. What we, as ministers or secretaries of equivalent, we looked at getting advice from our chiefs of defense staff on could we relaunch the mission after the evacuation. The advice we were given is that yes, we could. In terms of all the resources that were needed, not just from us, but we worked together as allies. I remember my first call was with the UK, and then we both spoke with the Secretary of Defense at that time, decided that we could, and then we had our military folks work collaboratively to put the operation together. But we don't get into details of what equipment is actually going to be needed. That's for them to decide.
How many of our Canadian forces were injured during the evacuation?
None that I was reported. But again, I just want to make sure that, going back to the motion here, that you fully understand that the Afghan Sikhs and Hindus were part of the government policy, because that's what the motion, what we're here to discuss, though, right?
I believe that we're here to discuss the operation as a whole of the evacuation.
It's not. Mr. Chair, if you can clarify that.
Correct. We're here to discuss whether the minister at the time, inappropriate, used his authority to give a preference to a particular group. And that's what we're here for. So you have about 30 seconds left.
Okay, so what specific types of undertakings did you convey to ensure that everyone who was supposed to get out of Afghanistan was taken out of Afghanistan?
My job was to overall manage the evacuation, so making sure that we have the proper authorities, enough not only the resources, but the authorities needed for them to be able to do their job. And then the Chief of Defense Staff goes in.
Okay. Okay, the point was, you just read out what this discussion was supposed to be about today, and he replied in the generality as opposed to the specifics that he wanted to address. So it's just...
I'm trying to be kind.
If I were him, I wouldn't have answered your question, but that's another issue. But that's just me. Madame Lapointe, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Or Mr. Chair, sorry. The logistical complexities of evacuation missions must seem insurmountable. At least they do to me, and yet our Canadian Armed Forces seem to do the impossible. So I do want to take this opportunity to thank them for their service to our country. I want to make sure I understand the overall approach to the mission. Can you give us a sense of the who, how, and the when of the timelines involved in getting the people out of Afghanistan?
Thank you. And that I'm happy to discuss, as I kind of mentioned earlier. First and foremost, we had requests from Global Affairs early on to look at the security of our Canadian Embassy personnel, which we normally get those. And then on the 27th of July, we received a request from Global Affairs to support the IRCC evacuation of the remainder of the Canadian personnel and the permanent residents. And on July 30th, the Canadian Armed Forces, we gave approval to deploy to Afghanistan to support that evacuation. The chartered flights working with Global Affairs started on August 4th. And then on August 13th, the additional measures announced by the Minister of Immigration at that time was announced to include additional groups, as I had mentioned, vulnerable groups such as women's leaders, humanitarian defense journalists, persecuted religious minorities, which included the Afghan 6 as well. This is where on the August 15th, because of the safety of the Canadian Embassy personnel, the Taliban had entered Kabul, we had to evacuate everybody and cease operations at that time. And then a lot of work happened in between, where on August 19th, we were able to determine and reinsert our folks with our allies back into the Kabul airport to resume the evacuation. And then managing that, there's a whole lot of stuff that happened in between that resulted in us completing everything by the 27th, where we had no choice after that but to completely depart.
And there were many vulnerable populations, some of them you've highlighted for us. How do we identify these groups, and how are they triaged?
Originally, it was through the through Global Affairs and especially through IRCC. They had a list there, and then based on the policy that the Minister of Immigration had announced, our government policy, that's how they were triaged. When we had to reinsert after into the Kabul airport and reestablished security, you can imagine the chaos that was taking place at that time. They had, once we give them the guidance, the direction, and with feeding information, then we had to rely on the folks on the ground to be able to triage. Is basically, from what I understand, the security system was set up where they would meet folks as well, and they had created their own RV point, which is outside the airport, where the Afghan 6 were also at that time. And then anybody who was on a list, they were able to get them inside, which included interpreters, their families, the vulnerable groups, and many others, included fixers for journalists. I remember those type of conversations taking place, and many others. So just imagine they were just trying to move many people as possible to the RV point, and if you're on the list, trying to get them in as quickly as possible.
Must have been so much chaos on the ground. What would have been the process for someone who wanted to get out of Afghanistan?
I would say that a lot of work was done beforehand, and I want to actually thank the members of Parliament who were involved with that, whether it was supporting the interpreters or vulnerable populations, forwarding that information to the IRCC at that time. I knew that even us, when I was Minister of Defense, the Canadian Armed Forces provided a list of people who worked for us. We provided that to the IRCC. Other NGOs like the Buller Foundations were also providing information. But everything worked off an approved list. So even through that chaos, we had to be very mindful that just imagine with the tens of thousands of people who were there, we all saw the images and how heartbreaking it is. And it was heartbreaking for anybody who actually served there. But through all that hardship, I would just want to also mention, just to the Canadian Armed Forces who were on the ground, because at that time they were accused of not helping as much. They saved so many people's lives. I've got to meet some of the interpreters and their families who are actually here. And it's because of that effort. And they did it in extreme circumstances. And sadly, I also want to say, let's not forget, 11 U.S. soldiers lost their lives at the location where we in the UK were manning. That was our location. We followed the intelligence very closely. We made the decision to stop at that time. But sadly, U.S. personnel were killed at that time. We did that safely as possible. But even through all those people, I know all of us feel a level of guilt because people that we worked with were left behind. But I know those efforts did not stop. I know of people that...
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the answer there. We're way past 2.5 minutes.
Merci. Monsieur le ministre, un peu plus
Thank
tôt.
you. Minister, you said earlier that the information on the vulnerable persons that you were getting and that you were passing along to the Chief of Staff, the determination of the rendezvous points and so on, that was between the military and those involved. You had nothing to do with that. On June 27th in the Globe,
2024, that he texted the Canadian military about what was happening on the ground based on his conversations with Calgary-based Manmeet Singh Bular Foundation, which he had arranged to privately sponsor the Afghan 6. J'aimerais savoir laquelle des deux versions est la bonne.
so I'd like to know which version is the truth. The one today or the one from before?
Où on cite votre déclaration du 20...
You are being quoted on what you said on June 26th.
Canadian military about what was happening on the ground based on
Well, what are
this
you referring
conversation.
to at the Globe article?
Un article.
An article. Yes.
Accurate how it was portrayed. And I've clearly stated any information that I had received during that time, whether it was from them or any other group, was relayed to the China command, and then they had that information. Just imagine again, if I had received information and not pushed it forward, and then the triaging of that information was done by the Canadian Armed Forces.
Donc, vous dites que dans l'article, le fait qu'on
So you're saying that in the article, that where it's referring to one of your statements, that is false?
Mill article was inaccurate. I've said that very clearly in my statement. I'm saying, yes, I did receive information from the Buller Foundation, but it made it seem like that article that this group was not part of a government policy. I want to make it clear that they were part of government policy and that the information that I had received was provided, like I did with many other groups that had called me at that time. Information was provided, and then the Canadian Armed Forces did what they could with that information. And clearly, what my clear point here is that the Globe article kind of insinuated that I gave special treatment to 6 or Hindus because they look like me. I want to make it very clear here that it was actually government policy that I was executing, and it is just a coincidence that the Minister of National Defense at that time, me, just happened to look like them and share a similar religion.
Juste pour être sûr, la déclaration à laquelle
The statement that was referred to was not given?
2.5 minutes, Ms. Matheson.
A lot of the questions I guess that I had were mainly about what we lack now in terms of, again, those and what the Office of the Ombuds for National Defense is trying to do to help where we go from here. A lot of lessons that need to be learned, I think, from those extremely difficult situations, and that we continue on in the best light possible. I think you've been very, very clear, and again, I want to say thank you for being very specific, and I completely understand the statements that you're making. I think one of the things that we need to look now to is, again, what was raised in the letter, and maybe your comments just on where we need to go going forward to ensure that we don't continue to repeat these same mistakes, and that we don't place labels on people, again, simply because, as you had said, because of the coincidences of the fact that you wear a turban or that you are sick.
You are here for a specific purpose.
Well, this is what he
and
said.
And the specific purpose...
Chair,
well,
I'm building off of what he has said.
Can I finish what I have to say? He is here for a specific purpose.
Well,
he is not here to go do a go forward or anything of that nature. He is accused of an improper use of his authority while he was the Minister of Defense to favor a particular group.
And I'm not doing
and so the questions are limited to that thing. If he wishes to comment, you're welcome to do so. But I just want to focus members' minds on the reason the minister.
I would suggest that I provide him with the opportunity, considering he's clearly not.
We're not taking opportunities today. We are just simply dealing with the motion.
I would like to stay handed to the motion, but what I will say is I would think it would have been very easily to see some of the facts that I also raised could have easily been seen by the people who actually wrote the article or anybody else, right? Because it wasn't just the government policy timeline. I mean, members of Parliament wrote letters for this group, and there was I can't believe I think we found dozens of petitions that were also put forward. So I think it would have easily, so we've not been in this, I'm here to clarify your questions, of course, but at the same time, what I kind of see it as is a lot of this information that I'm talking about could have also been found publicly as well.
I cede.
Well, there's no next round. Mr. Allison, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. So my question is then, you're saying that unequivocally the Globe and Mail article was wrong?
I'm saying it was inaccurate. Sorry, it was inaccurate, yes.
Okay, so you're saying that any military sources they had were also incorrect in their assessment?
I'm not here to judge their level of sources. I'm here to tell you what was written in the article was inaccurate.
Okay, all right. So I guess when we talk about operational priorities then, the question I would have then is that Canadian military interpreters were left behind because they didn't have the resources to evacuate people. So would that be accurate?
First of all, I just want to also, since I'm now answering your questions for the first time, I just want to make sure you're also clear that the motion at hand has been addressed for you, that the Afghan Sikhs and Hindus that were part of the government, that were actually part of the government policy and that was executing government policy. I think we can agree on that.
Yeah, so I'm just asking about part of the motion that says here that that basically to the detriment of the evacuation of Canadians and allied Afghans. So,
but as you can see here, that the operation we were conducting, because they were part of this, the same group, it's not whether it's a detriment. It was the operation being conducted for all the folks in the actual policy.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Minister Sajan. I want to ask you about the prioritization of the groups. And after this Government of Canada press release on August 13th, was there any kind of change in the prioritization of the various groups that were in Afghanistan and the vulnerable groups outside of the priority groups?
Which time are you referring to?
This press release on August 13th, where prior to that we had a prioritization on Canadian citizens, permanent residents, Afghan interpreters, and fixers. And subsequent to that were vulnerable Afghans. Was there a change?
No, that's a great question. Actually, that was the referring to is on the August 13th press release, right? So that was what the immigration minister, and as I mentioned, the letter that hopefully you'll see afterwards that was signed by 25 members of parliament, which included Conservative members of parliament. And I have to admit, the work of the foundation that you're talking about was actually with the Conservative Party, where it actually started first, right? And so this, yes, it was added on August 13th for the vulnerable groups.
Okay. But did it change the prioritization away from Canadians per se and permanent residents, interpreters and fixers to prioritize other groups?
So it was as it clearly states in the press release, they were added to the special immigration status.
Right. Okay. As vulnerable classes.
Yes.
Okay. And was JTF2 sent outside the wire to collect any of these other groups, or even for the Canadians and the PRs that might have been in Afghanistan?
Look, one is I'm not going to discuss JTF2 operations, but I can tell you that they had all the authorities necessary to carry out their work. What they deemed necessary was on the ground, and they also knew the vulnerabilities. And the reason I'm kind of emphasizing here is interpreters did also make it out, and their families. And I had the pleasure of meeting some of them.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Minister, did Canadian Armed Forces at all at any point in time express any concern about the change in direction after August 13th?
There wasn't. First of all, it was added to. It's not a change in direction. This was a government policy that was created at the behest of members of Parliament, and to be honest, and mostly from your party, right, that were added on. So they were added on. The Canadian Armed Forces,
No,
as
at
you
the
know,
same time, I don't think that letter
as you know, they
said that
do
we
their
would
work.
not
They
prioritize
do their
Canadians
work.
over
They have a
other
list, and they executed that policy. One thing I can assure you, when it comes to the people who they work with, they did their absolute 110% to making sure that they supported everyone for the evacuation.
So how well were you briefed, and what further direction did you provide after the evacuation started and after the news release came on August 13th? So from August 13th to August 27th, when the evacuations ended, how involved were you in that at that point in time?
When it comes to the list and the immigration measures, that's done through IRCC. But of course, I'm trying to get to that. Our job was to actually conduct the evacuation safely, and that's what we were actually focused on. So a lot of the questions were in terms of prioritization and things. That's for IRCC to discuss. What we were doing was creating the environment for a safe evacuation.
Zan, final 5 minutes. Mr. Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and Minister, welcome to the committee. You offered earlier to read the letter that you received from MPs of multiple parties. Can you read that for us? You offered to read it earlier. I think it's important to get it on the record and hear what those members had to say at the time.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And because it's about a page and a half long, I will mention a key portion that I didn't want to discuss, which was, and I quote, on March 25th, 2020, so these are 25 members of Parliament who wrote this, ISIS-K terrorists attacked Gurdwara Sri Harai Sahib in Kabul and murdered 25 Sikhs, including a 4-year-old Tanya Kaur. At the funeral for the victim of this attack, a second attack was initiated involving the detonation of an explosive device. Earlier in July 2018, the senior leadership of the Sikh and Afghan communities was assassinated in a suicide bombing that took 19 lives in Jalalabad. In June 2020, an Afghan Sikh, Nidan Singh Sachdeva, was abducted from a gurdwara and tortured for weeks. That was followed on July 17th by the abduction of a 13-year-old Samit Kaur who was kidnapped from a Kabul gurdwara where she was living with her blind mother and younger brother. Salmeet's father was killed in the March attack. ISIS-K has sworn to exterminate all Afghan Sikhs and Hindus if they do not leave Afghanistan. And I'll just jump a bit to where it also states, without internal flight options, international resettlement has become the only viable solution for Afghan Sikhs and Hindus. In light of the immediate threat faced by these communities, we urge you to create a special program for Afghan Sikhs and Hindu refugees under 25.2 of the Immigration Refugee Protection Act so that they can be brought to safety in Canada. And it goes on a little bit, and it's signed by majority of members of Parliament from the Conservative Party of Canada. It includes the NDP and also the Green Party as well. And I also will note, actually, the former Minister of Defense, Peter MacKay, as well. And the point that I'm getting at here is this was going, and this letter, the date of this letter was actually done a year prior. So advocacy work was taking place for some time by all parties here. And then the Minister of Immigration added this because members of Parliament wanted this added. Once it was added, it was my job to execute the government policy, and that's exactly what I did. And it is... it should be noted because I used to answer these questions about 20 years ago about who I am, and it was disturbing at that time. But one thing I did reflect on that when there are questions like this is to address them, and so that's why I actually really appreciate this opportunity to kind of clarify what actually took place, because sometimes we forget in all our advocacy there's been work happening by different groups. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't even realize that actually the 25 MPs, I did some of the other work. I was focused on some other work, but there's MPs from all over working with NGOs that actually created a policy within government. It shows that members of Parliament work actually does have an impact.
No, does it surprise you no members of the bloc asked you for the same?
I would say it's disappointing, but I also will say, in fairness, when I was a former Minister of International Development, they had supported vulnerable groups in many other places. It was, I would say I was more disappointed that the information of the government policy was for all members of Parliament to see, and that that the statement that I provided earlier had the information that kind of clearly stated that this was actually government policy, and I was executing government policy at that time.
Bit of a coincidence that the motion that brought you here to the committee today is from the party that didn't sign the letter?
I think that could be something could be talked about.
Sure. Can you, for the benefit of the committee, read the names of those people who signed?
Excuse my pronunciation, some of the names. Zaid Abdulatif, Kenny Chu, Todd Doherty, Honorable Carrie Lynn Finley, Garnet Genius, Tracy Gray, Jasraj Singh Holland, Tamara Jensen, Aaron O'Toole, Brad Redcup, Jag Sahota, the Honorable Tim Uppel, Kieran Vecchio, Arnold Viersen, Brad Viss, Kathy Wagenthal, and the Honorable Peter MacKay, Matt Green, Lig Zen, Jack Harris, Lindsay Matheson, Brian Mass, and Peter Julian, Elizabeth May, Paul Manley, and Jessica Atwin when she was part of the Green. Thank you.
And that brings our session to a close. I want to thank the Minister for his appearance here today and offering his clarification of the story. Colleagues, we're going to suspend for a moment while the Minister leaves and go in camera, and then we will resume our deliberations. So with that, we are suspended.
Thank you.